Sunil Mahindra, you're Chief Investment Officer, Goldman Sachs Asset Management for International Equity. What is your assessment of the equity markets worldwide at the moment?
We remain pretty constructive about equity markets. We think returns over the next 12 months will be high single digit, and we think that's driven by two factors. If we look at valuations around the world, valuations look very much in line with their long-term averages. Some markets a bit more expensive, some markets a bit cheaper. And secondly, we see earnings growth coming through. Earnings growth is coming through strongest in the US, and we're hopeful that earnings growth will broaden out into other parts of the world, maybe Europe and Japan.
Europe is lagging behind in structural reform, but are there still opportunities in European shares?
Yeah, Europe has definitely been a disappointment in terms of the type of reforms governments have put through since the financial crisis. However, if we look, there are some windows of opportunity. Spain and Ireland, who are two of the worst hit economies during the financial crisis, actually have reformed very well. Growth is starting to pick up, jobs are starting to be created in these economies, and we can see a brighter path for those economies. But maybe other economies, such as Italy and France, have actually not implemented as much structural reform as we would like. And so we see a more mixed picture in Europe at the moment.
Where to turn to for consumer strength?
Well, if we look at the world in whole, actually demand is picking up, but it's very patchy. The US has really been the engine of global growth during this cycle. A lot of the reforms that were taken have come through, and what that means is that GDP growth and household demand is actually the strongest in the US. Now, this is coming through at a time when unemployment has continued to fall in the US, and we would be hopeful that a wage growth would start to pick up over the coming months and quarters. Europe, on the other hand, has really lagged in this. Unemployment remains very high, and so we're not really seeing any signs of wage growth, of end demand growth in Europe. Japan is the wild card. We've had a lot of complicated factors, including VAT, a sales tax hike in Japan, and so the data is mixed. The latest data shows demand being very weak in the third quarter, but we're hopeful that demand can actually start to improve as we progress through the rest of the year.
You're based in London, where Prime Minister David Cameron warned of a possible new economic downturn after 2008. Now, if he's right, everything is put into jeopardy, including equity markets. But is he right, or is that worrying maybe just political?
We're a bit more positive than that. We think that, as I said, economic growth around the world remains inconsistent. Some areas doing better, other areas doing worse. I think what he was highlighting was that growth in UK's nearest neighbour, Europe, remains very weak, very patchy, and therefore that will have a knock-on effect on economic growth in the UK.
Now, Goldman Sachs Asset Management points out mergers and acquisition as an important driver of equity markets. Can you specify this situation a bit for us?
Yeah, so at the start of 2014, speaking to the companies that we invest in, we were hearing that companies had been building up significant amounts of cash on their balance sheet. Companies had been reluctant to really spend that cash because they thought there were tail risks in the global economy. However, what we heard more recently was that companies were actually starting to get excited about the opportunities. They thought central banks around the world had removed some of the tail risks there were in the global economy, and so that gave them the confidence to start to look for opportunities. And we've seen that this year. We've seen cross-border deals. We've seen GE buy Alstom in Europe, or Alstom's generation business. We've seen other deals within the tech space. We've seen even cost-cutting deals within Europe, Holcim and Lafarge, two companies very close to home. So we're starting to see that level of activity pick up as corporates feel more confident, and we expect this to continue.
Sunil Mahindra, thank you very much for your comments.